What's up, everyone?
Howdy.
Hey, Trav.
Hey.
So, as you guys know, we're going to share this with other people, friends and family, and make it public. But I wanted to pull together some friends that I know either are voting for Biden or could vote for Biden, or friends who are free enough to think that they could. So I'm not
Some of
assuming
our states, maybe they've already voted for Biden. I mean,
yeah,
right?
or maybe they already have.
Yes.
As Christians, which part of what led me to want to do this was because I'm getting tired of like, how could you possibly think that way? And so that was kind of wearing at me. And there's a way people are thinking, so it's important for, I think, people to hear how are people thinking, because they're really not asking that question to find out how you're thinking. They're asking that question to accuse you of thinking wrong. So, so I really thank you guys for all being willing to do this. I feel like it's a really important conversation, and I know all of you guys, and I'm going to explain why these guys on this call, but I think it's an important conversation for our country because our country has gotten, I think in the last 4 years, it got even more polarized. I think there was a lot of polarization during Obama, but then there's still been a lot more extreme the last 4 years because of the president's style of things he'll say. And a lot of people are not listening to each other at all. It's just gotten like this and knee-jerk reactions and memes and things like that. So I'm getting tired of bad information and things where people don't even ask or hear, have no intention to hear what the middle is saying or the other side. So what I want to do on this call, because I come from like a pretty Republican dad and family, and I know a lot of you did too. And the reason we're all in this together is because we all know each other from our church days, or an old college group kind of days back in Scottsdale. And we all kind of came out of a very Republican and very conservative, religiously borderline, if not fundamentalism. And we had very strong opinions about some of the political stuff. And those carried with me for like 15 years. It's only been like the last actually, it's been about 14 years for me to start analyzing it. But before that, I always just believed, all of that. And so I really want to address those Christian conservative Republicans, basically, who always say, how could you vote for Biden because of abortion? Or how could you vote for Biden because of this or that? So I want to address that. Want you guys just introduce yourselves, at least your names and maybe a little tidbit about you. Brett?
My name is Brett. I'm friends with you jokers, and I teach worldview, I teach ethics, teach Bible. So, and have been thinking about this for a little bit. So,
yeah. Dave?
All right. Hey, my name's Dave Hanson here. I'm married, have 2 dogs, and yeah, I work in sales. I'm in Chicago right now. So out on a sales trip. And yeah, I've known Travis since high school days.
Nate Dogg?
Yeah, my name is Nate. I work in the nonprofit world, international nonprofits. I served overseas in Europe for 7.5 years, married, 3 kids. And I really think like living overseas, particularly in a post-communist country, has shaped a lot of like the way I view the world, the way I view Christianity, the way I view America, and has really helped kind of reform the way I think about Christianity, and particularly God's love for the world.
Yo, G.
Hey guys, Grant Walsh. Good to be with you guys, and I probably hold distinct honor here of being the person that no one thought would be following God at this point. Just say that as a testament to God's grace and mercy in my life and how he transformed me. And now I live and work overseas, trying to do his work there in Asia.
Cody.
So I guess it's my turn. Yeah. So I'm Cody. I was a pastor for a number of years. I've also taught Bible and worldview and different things like that. And I'm a fledgling writer right now and doing other things with my time. And have been thinking about this for a long, long time.
Yeah. And so all 6 of us have had leadership capacities in the church. That's an important note. And we're all from the reason there's no people of color on here or women on here is because I did not really have these conversations with any of the women in my life as much, except for like maybe in bigger, broader groups. The deeper conversations I'd have would be like with you guys or like good friends of mine. And then people of color, like that was part of the problem with I mean, I feel like it's a problem, but it was the nature of where we grew up and the church we were in. Like it was very rare. I knew a couple of Black people and I was very drawn to them because it was so rare in my life. And I don't know what that is, but that's why this is what it is. This is just a microcosm of people who were from a very Republican environment. And now it's like 20 years later, you know, how did you get to here now, you know? So I hope that makes sense. I want to acknowledge my bias, and I'm kind of asking the questions sort of as an unconvinced, still libertarian, Republican-leaning person. I've become a lot less conservative from living in Providence, Rhode Island, from reading a lot of books that challenged my thinking in my faith towards not thinking that way only. So having like a broader vision of the world and issues that matter. So I still have this gut feeling though, that my dad instilled in me that government sucks at its job and it will bloat itself and it will get bigger and it will take over more power and more money, become more and more inefficient. So that's like one of my biases that I can't shake. And I just wanted to be upfront about that. Like that's kind of where some of my challenge might come from. And then 2 acknowledgements, and then we'll jump into you guys, your views on things. So I think there's a big confusion in our country where majority of evangelical Christians, 80% apparently voted for Trump in the 2016 election. And now like we're all kind of inundated with these types of Christians in our lives where they think that you absolutely have to vote for Trump. There's no other way. He's done so much for Christians and he's done so much for the party, and there's all this rhetoric in that direction to where it's almost like, I can't believe you. How could you not? What the heck are you thinking? You call yourself a Christian? And I've even heard that kind of level of, and you guys have too, we've talked, that kind of doubting someone's faith if they won't vote for Trump. And it's like, that's insane. I mean, that's where we come from. That's the type of thinking we were from. So it's going to be interesting to see how you guys get out of that type of thinking. I think this is a disservice to the gospel, like to God's perspective, that we would think we could fit him in a political party in America. And then there's a strong nationalistic identity in America where American Christians think God and country, and they're almost level, like Constitution, Bible. And this actually happened in a conversation last week with my friend's mom and dad. Constitution and Bible, which one's more important, Mom? She's like, well, they're both the same. And you're like, what? What did you just say? So that happened. And, you know, that's that's nationalism. And then the last thing I wanted to just say is that we are not experts, obviously, but it would be a full-time job to become an expert on all the issues. Sure. So there are people who are full-time researching and writing books and doing podcasts and things like that. And their whole 8-hour day or whatever is dedicated to all that information. and they still disagree on everything. So, I mean, that's something to be said. Like, none of us, we're all half-baked at best on our politics. And that's what's kind of causing a lot of this, is like nobody really knows what the hell is happening with politicians and with information. So it's all super half-baked. So how can we be so hard on each other to not hear, how did you come to that? How did you come to that? How are you basing that opinion? Like, instead it's just yelling at each other. And the parties are battling for power. They're just battling for power. They're not trying to persuade the country. They're just battling for power. That's the other thing I'm very convinced of. There's no attempt to persuade. It's just preach to the choir. So that's where we find ourselves. So yeah, would all of you say you did come from the way I'm describing it, like that was pretty much your reality in high school and college days? Your environment?
Yeah. I mean, I think we all grew up in the same youth group, right? And there's a ton that I appreciate about it, and I still look back fondly with, that I'm very grateful for. But there was this coupling of Christianity and a kind of particular political view or a particular worldview about America that I think, I mean, it's probably been kind of at least 15 years, we're closer to 20 now, that I've been trying to decouple, or just has been decoupling. And I think it happened for me as I started to wrestle more with the prophets and Jesus and trying to learn those lessons, like learn that message on its own terms, and then hearing conservative political voices and going like, these just don't seem to be the same thing, like this is not in the same sphere. And so they started to decouple. Like, I think for me, I started to be able to see the distinction between them, and that they weren't as enmeshed as I had originally been brought up to think.
Yeah, we were talking before we started recording. 3 of us, Brett, Dave, and I, were on a trip to Guatemala together, summer of 2000, I think it was. So 20 years ago, right? And we were visiting, and it was a mission trip, and just kind of reflecting back on that trip and how we were really critical of I think the Catholic Church, particularly in Guatemala, and the syncretism and the enmeshing with animism, and just how we really looked down on the Guatemalan Catholic Church. And ironically, I basically spent the next 15 years living and being very present internationally, and still do, going to Mexico, going to El Salvador and Nicaragua with my job. But I say ironically because probably what is decoupled, along with the Gospels and my readings of the scriptures, but has really decoupled my faith from kind of nationalism, has been living overseas and experiencing different cultures, and beginning to realize that every culture has both brokenness and beauty, and being able to discover what those are and celebrate them as God's truth, as God's beauty, and then recognizing that the brokenness is a destruction of the way God intended the world to be. And so when you do that in another culture, it requires you then looking back at your own and saying, oh man, that means there's both beauty, which I think as Americans we all recognize, because that's kind of pumped into us from a young age, that we're the greatest country in the world, look at all the great things we've done. But then having to ask the hard questions, like what are the areas of brokenness within our culture? And if that's the case, every country, every culture has both beauty and brokenness, then kind of this these categories of greatest country or best country begin to kind of break down.
Thank you, Nate. Dave, how would you describe, or what was the original question?
A little bit of your journey.
Oh yeah, kind of your journey back then to now.
Sure. So I think for me it was similar in some ways, but basically it was after I was working as a youth pastor for 4 years in California. I moved back to Phoenix in kind of a central Phoenix neighborhood that was kind of very diverse. It was a low income neighborhood. It was a lot of fun, and I got to have my life bump into a lot of different types of people that I didn't know before. Growing up, you didn't see a lot of people of color in our churches. You didn't see people that were in different socioeconomic areas, and just realizing that they were not as, you make a lot of assumptions about the way things are. And then when you see it firsthand, you start to notice it like, oh, I always thought this, but it just sheds light on the complexities of things, and it makes it to where the black and whiteness of all issues is like, well, these people are good, honest people who also, maybe they're Christian, maybe they're not, but they have really honest beliefs that are just different, and they're not stupid, they're not dumb, they're not wrong necessarily. And you can't see that if you are only exposed to kind of one line of thinking, one way of thought. So mine was more just kind of that experience. Moving to another neighborhood completely changed the whole thing.
Yeah, you're exposed to more types of people, and you were like, I can't reconcile all this anymore.
Yeah.
How about you, G?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say my experience was similar. Certainly, moving overseas and living in a Muslim culture, living in a Hindu culture, seeing people from all different walks of life, all different values. One of the huge things that hit me is living in Asia for so long is the communal lifestyle and the kind of togetherness that they have compared to the hyper individualism of Western culture. And you start to realize, as you guys have kind of touched on, there's beautiful things about both, right? And the thing that strikes me the most of what I've seen happen over the last couple of years, or maybe the last 4 or 8 years or whatever it may be, is just a general lack of humility, and a general lack of understanding that God made people differently, different passions, different giftings, different ways of seeing the world, and that's beautiful. And that if he wanted us to all think the same way about every single thing, he would have made us that way, but he didn't. And I think the diversity is a beautiful thing, and that's the part that I long for. And I think that another thing that really kind of hit home to me is that I truly believe that most people in our nation and in our world wants what's best for them, for their families, for their communities, and for their country. But people disagree on the right way to get to that, right? And there's different ways of viewing that. And I think that just embracing that instead of pushing that off as, oh, you're wrong about that issue, you're wrong about that, really kind of helped change and shape my worldview.
That's cool. How about you, Cody?
Yeah, I mean, not to be a broken record, I think that it was very similar in some ways, growing up in it, and, having a lot of affection for it. I think as I was growing up in it, still I have, a lot of gratitude for a lot of the relationships that I have, a lot of the stuff that I learned. I think there's a lot of, I think, what brought me to ask the questions and dig deeper into the Bible and what it actually has to say about certain things and how it might challenge certain assumptions, I think came from my upbringing. So, I can't hate on my upbringing in that regards, and I think that, yeah. So, but I think for me, a lot of it started even all the way back in high school, looking at, I think, the dissonance that I saw between the narrative of the gospel and the narrative of the, I guess, political system that Christianity seemed to align with. The dissonance within its own structure and the dissonance between that and what I saw in the Bible. Studied in college a lot about the nature of language and how language is used to shift and persuade and oftentimes deceive people in large groups and things like that. And so I think, for me, it was, a long time ago, like my senior year of high school, I remember writing a paper or writing an article that I submitted to the AZ Republic as some like assignment or something like that on why free market capitalism is the best thing ever. I think that was literally the title of my my first op-ed that I got. So things changed and shifted for me in some ways, and how I question things and how I do that. But similar to that, like a lot of it is about, reading the Old Testament, reading the minor prophets, reading what Jesus said, even looking at Jesus' disciples. I think of, you have Judas the Zealot, or is it Simon the Zealot? Not Judas the Zealot. My DTS professors are hating me right now. You have Simon the Zealot, who is basically this revolutionary. You have Matthew the tax collector. You have these people who, of the Roman times, were literally on completely opposite ends of the spectrum. And Jesus, who would have hated each other, would have been enemies in any other context. Jesus brings them together and doesn't try to get them to a place where they're like, you're steadfast in that. Like, they're submitting those things to Christ, and Christ is over and above those things. And at the same time, I think very much so prophetically contrary to those things. And I think reimagining the church from a position of not power and privilege, but position of, I think, vulnerability and oppression, I think, which is something I had to imagine, not because I didn't grow up in that. That wasn't my, that wasn't my upbringing, but, so anyways, all that said, that's kind of what got me thinking about a lot of this and has moved me towards things. So.
I want to go. I had a conversation with Nate one time. I was driving down the PCH and he was in my headphones, and I said, I sort of read Jim Wallace's book, God's Politics. I was really into Shane Claiborne's book, and it really made a temporary liberal out of me for a while. And then I defaulted back into like government sucks at its job sort of thing. But when I got to Jim Wallace level, it's like a bigger book and a little more heady. And it was like, God is not a Democrat or Republican is like the subtitle, but it feels very Democrat, like as you go through it. And I was having trouble with that because I was thinking, I want to hear from your response on this, Nate, because I was thinking one of his statements is a country's national budget is a moral document. So he's basically saying the priorities of a nation have a moral implication. And I said to Nate, like, I don't think I agree with that. This was like 5 years ago. I said, I don't think I agree with that. And he's like, why not? And I was like, oh, Nate agrees with that. And I said, because I said, the way I thought about it at the time was like, because I don't think it's government's job to like order our lives morally, which Nate probably would agree with that, but it's the way I saw it was I couldn't see how you can look at it as a moral document necessarily. But yeah, so I think before we go into any specific issues, it'd be cool to hear if a couple of you or however many of you want to chime in on this. Like when it comes to government, like the way my dad taught me was, small government, low taxes, let the federal government do what its job is, and then let the states do the rest. And we don't have time on here for like a history lesson, so it just has to be what you think right now. Or how you got to that. But yeah, Nate, so what do you think, like when you come to that question of like, is a national budget a moral document? I think most Republicans would be like, no, that's not the point of a national budget. It's to just do what it's got to do, you know, and free up the market to bring everyone up, including as low as possible, to create opportunities and stuff like that and jobs. That's the way they think.
Yeah, I think governments are essential. Are more or less like systems for ruling a group of people, right? And so, or ordering life in amongst a group of people or multiple like groups of people. So, you have to have like agreed upon, whether it's ethics or things that a society deems as important, right? So, and things that they expect the government to like take care of, essentially, right? And that's what I always laugh when, you know, people. First I cry, then I laugh when people call me a Marxist or a communist, usually on Facebook. Some of them.
It's your beard.
Yeah, it's the beard. Some of them would probably call it to my face as well. But I laugh because I'm like, even like the Green New Deal and these like far left American political like ideas, they're a far cry from like Marxism and communism. But we've placed values on where we want our government to rule, right? And so, no one is really arguing about should our governments like take care of our streets, right? Everyone but that's a social program like that our taxes pay for, like, and we're happy that our streets are paved, and we're happy about like that our roads work and the traffic lights work, right? So the issue comes down to what should the government care for? But like the biggest social program we have is our military. but like if you're looking from the Republican side, they're saying like, yes, like we need a huge military. And that says something. There is like moral implications of that, right? Like,
of like what your country values,
right or wrong. So whether it's that or sustainable energy solutions, sorry, it's not COVID, I don't think. So I think it's popcorn.
We'll see.
We'll find out.
Period, but.
Yeah. So I think we're like government and military is a massive social program. So when you're putting a ton of money into something from a government perspective, that is what's social, right? It's for the benefit of all people. I'm not saying that military is bad, but when like you're making a statement if a lot of your money is going there, right? So what we as a society, and this will start to like explain like why I've moved more like left compared to where I used to be, is that some of the things that I think our government should like take care of that's for the common good is like medicine, like healthcare. Like I feel like everyone should be able to have good and like proper healthcare. And so that's my perspective, right? And so some people think we need a big, massive military to protect us, right? So it is about like the perspective you have, but there are moral implications of just like, you know, what's funny about that, Travis, is you've probably gone through some form of like Christian, like personal finances, right? And that's like one of the main like talking points is, if you want to like judge if you want to know and understand what someone values, look at their checkbook, right? Or look at their bank statement and you'll see where they're spending their money. So I would argue that the same implications are there for our government and where we spend our money.
Yeah. Any of you guys also have like specifically on like role of government, how big or small it should be, like, or how much it should. Any of you have anything specific to that? Because like I just remember like that was I think my dad's strongest like lesson about politics to me was about that always.
I mean, I'll put in a couple of ideas here, but I think one of the things that was that kind of transformed in my thinking was, before it was like right or left, the question was how big or how small the government was. And to me, the question really should be about how good is the government. So the assumption on the one side is that government is inherently evil. So it just is evil, and so we should make it as small as possible so it could commit as little evil as possible in our lives. And the other one, you know, looked at government more as kind of something that could save us or could make our life better or whatever. And so maybe we overemphasized our trust in it, but it was just always this big or small thing. And I guess so that's one point. So I stopped thinking about just size of government and just whether government was good or evil, you know. And I came from an environment that always looked at it as evil, so it needed to be limited. But that's not necessarily the case. We could work towards good government if we wanted to work towards it, if we held that out as an ideal. But the second point I would say is that, and this maybe goes back to that question of a budget, is I started to let go of the myth of neutrality, which is that somehow our political convictions or even what the government ought to be is this neutral thing. And I basically came to the place where it's an impossibility for anything to be neutral. Everything starts with a theology. And so it might not be our theology, but it starts with a theology. And what I started to think is, or kind of realize, is that even from the Declaration of Independence, you have a theology that is being laid out that you can see as the groundwork then of the value system, which is driving the action, right? And for me, what I started to think is that like the theology of the country, the theology that's driving some of this is not right. So if I'm a Christian, I have a certain conviction about who God is and what God's will is. And actually, that is not the same conviction that is driving all of this stuff. And so it's not neutral and it's not Christian. And so I guess maybe what that drove me towards is recovering that sense of Christians being alien in the world. Mm-hmm. That we, our citizenship and our home is not in, I can't find a home in these parties. I can't find a home in these political systems because it's grounded in something that's not my conviction of who I am as a follower of Christ. So that did a couple things to me. One, didn't trust in or kind of think that any one party held the kind of true Christian kind of pathway or platform. But then I was also able to see that when I go line item by line item on issues, I could find things on both sides where there was common ground, but neither one of them held it in totality for me. And so again, I use the sort of decoupling language as like those things that were enmeshed and kind of like fused together just kind of start to pull apart. So I don't know if that made sense, but that's kind of how it was happening for me. I let go of the myth of neutrality. I just don't believe in such a thing anymore. And that was kind of what was, especially on the right, is just limited government, let the playing field be equal and neutral, and just kind of let things go, and it will be good. So.
But Brett, let me ask like a follow-up there, because I'm assuming you're going to vote, right?
I am.
You're going to vote. So, because I've heard the argument too, like we're aliens in a foreign land,
Sure.
like this place isn't our home.
Yeah.
You just made the argument that my mom accuses me of, that you're of too much heavenly, you're too heavenly minded, you're of no earthly good. I'm like, no,
yeah,
Mom,
so I just want to hear, Brett. Yeah, I want to hear that. Are you like, you're going to vote? So maybe just take that next step for us to understand, like, why are you still engaged and not like completely removing yourself from it?
Yeah, so the sort of alien, like if we are aliens in our citizenship, it doesn't mean that we're withdrawing necessarily from civic life and from the life around it. It actually means that we ought to understand our Christianity as a political statement in and of itself. So, for example, one of the things I started to think about was what was it like for early Christians to be in that moment where they had to refuse to confess Caesar as Lord and proclaim and confess Jesus as Lord? And what would that look like for me as an American? Like, at what point do I have that conflict where my confession that Jesus is Lord brings me in conflict with something? So anyway, when it comes now down to like, all right, how do I see my, how am I going to vote? I guess maybe I'll say historically, I have voted Democrat. I have voted Republican. I have withdrawn my vote. And I've withdrawn my vote at the presidential level and chosen to vote at lower levels. So I've done it all. I don't know if any of it's right. But at the moment, I do what I kind of have the conviction as the best I can put the picture together. I have, so yeah, I guess I try and find the most common ground. And so I do let my values, I do let my convictions guide me. And I'm assuming a kind of brokenness to the whole thing. I'm assuming that I won't be able to find complete agreements. So I try and find the most common ground. The second thing is I've become more and more convinced that we spend a lot of time thinking about the presidential race and not enough time thinking about our local sheriffs, our local judges, our local state legislators, our local propositions. And that is where maybe the most impact in terms of what life is like for us in our communities is made. So I'm trying to pay more and more attention to some of that stuff. But I recognize that my ability to vote and my ability to shape things is a way that I can love the community, and the way that I can seek the good and the welfare of the community is to try and vote for it. So.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And that's a really good word about the local involvement, paying attention to that. A lot of people are so distracted by the big news, they forget about the local, almost more real news.
Well, if you think about like some of the stuff we're going on with the racial stuff, the judges that people are going to sit before, who we have a say in who they are, that's where a lot of those decisions are being made. So if we see that there's a problem there, then those judges, which like for the vast majority of my life, I just basically went, I don't know, ding, 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 doesn't matter. They might actually have the most impact on some people's lives more than our president will. So,
Yeah.
Cody, Dave, Grant, on just size of government, do you have, I'm hearing from Brett and Nate that they don't necessarily have a fear of bigger government, like the way that was instilled in me. Do you guys feel like you still have that, or is it kind of gone? It's just more like, let's just make the government good, make the government great again.
Well, so for me, I don't really care that much about the size of the government. It's not an issue for me. But what I will say is the effectiveness is much more important than the size. And so there's things that I really feel the government should be doing, kind of like what Nate was talking about with healthcare. It's like, I think that there are very important things that are not being done that should be done. But I kind of would like our priorities reallocated and our budgets revisited and sort of put in a more healthy direction. But I am not, that ideological thing of big government, small government is a non-issue for me.
That's cool. How about you, Grant and Cody?
Yeah, I would say the exact same thing as these guys are saying. I think a good government, an effective government that works towards the common good for people is important. But I also think, and I just want to throw this out there because it was important to me in my journey, is that I really don't believe that Republicans believe in small government. I think that they believe in big government for their interests, like military or Wall Street bailouts or things like of these nature. We see lots and lots of money, right? Yeah, lots of money and big government for certain things, and then small, and then don't want government for other things, where it's the flip side on the other side. So I think that's a little bit of a misconception about the actual way it works out. I mean, when you're spending $1 trillion a year on the military and I looked up these stats, $25 billion a year just to maintain our nuclear arsenal that can blow up the world 20 times over, right? We have money, we have resources, right? And I think what you guys are saying, what I would say as well, is that I would like to see us look at that and see, well, what is better for the common good? What is better for the uplifting of people's lives? What is consistently pro-life, and use those resources to those ends.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you guys say is you believe in the myth of good government, and you don't want to totally and absolutely dominate the world in such a way that you can annihilate it 10 times over. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's exactly what we're saying, Travis. Okay. Thank you. No,
okay,
the only thing
a little swallow.
Yeah, sorry. The only thing that I'm going to add, I mean, you know, I think what everybody has said has been really, really sharp and on point. I think there's almost a challenge in the question if we're talking about how can a Christian be a Democrat versus how can a Christian be a Republican. Like, I think that at the very least, there should be equal weight to the question on both sides. You know, like, I think that there's this assumption in the question of how could a Christian be a Democrat that assumes that, of course, a Christian should be a Republican. And I think that that's where the flaw really comes in, is that, you know, big government, small government, the Bible doesn't care. It doesn't talk about it. It's an anachronistic, you know, argument to say. I think there's examples when, you know, I think of the gleaning laws in Leviticus, that you could say that's a big government idea of saying, hey, you need to leave the edges of your field for the poor. And then you could also talk about how, you know, there's certain areas. I mean, there's just, you can find evidence that can support both sides, which to me shows that the Bible is not talking about that. The Bible is not making that a priority to it. The Bible is, you know, and because
I agree with that, Cody, but I also think that there's a reason why these Christians who would propose that idea, that there's some spiritual tie to this, like, For example, we talked about, we would reference this a little bit, that Wayne Grudem put out a town hall discussion, a letter to an anti-Trump friend in August. And one of the assumptions he's making, that evangelical Christian who believes in the moral values of the Bible, how could they support or authorize the use of our cripple our economy with ever increasing government control and taxes? So somehow some Christians are making a claim that there's something biblical about smaller government and low taxes, which I don't know exactly where they're getting that from, but it's there. I know it's not biblical, Cody, but I also don't know how it became Christian.
Well, it became, well, I mean, I think I want to be careful how I say this. I think that on the one hand, there's a lot of things that happened in the past with very good intentions that backfired ultimately. And I'm 100% convinced that that's going to happen again. And I will probably be a part of some of that, that there's going to be things that I think people do with very good intentions. And I think that in some of the roots of some of the fusing of that thought with Christian values was very, I think, well-intended. You have, I think, going back, you want this, if you think of even how America came to be, it was coming out of basically a place where there was zero separation of church and state, where, for the church to thrive apart from the state, you basically could get burned at the stake. You could get, ostracized and kicked out. There is this, I think, fear embedded in the American ethos of what could happen if the state has full control and the church is fully complicit in it. And I think that's a legitimate fear. And you see the danger of that and how damaging that was. And so I think that there is an ethos there in it. But, I think that once again, it and we had talked about this some beforehand, you have, I think, there's the political games that are being played, that pretty much every party has to develop some form of coalition of a group of a lot of different people that all want different things, and somehow come up with enough consistency and enough of a coalition to get a majority of the vote. That's the way politics work. And after, segregation got pretty much made illegal and the schools became desegregated, the typical breakdown between what was the Democratic Party and the Republican Party all got jumbled up and all that stuff. There had to be, I think, a shift in how different parties operated in order to get votes, in order to develop coalitions. And I think that, and I don't, I'm not there. Sorry, go ahead.
On that point, Cody, because you just brought it up, I'll interject that quote I was telling you guys about from this book, which I've been reading, and it's been very enlightening because it's written very neutrally. Like she's giving both arguments on everything, every point. Well, this is how conservatives felt about that. Here's how the liberals felt about it on every point. And I feel like it's fair. It's not making one sound better than the other. And on this one, she said, when it came to like some of the social conservative issues like abortion and gays or homosexuality and secularism, she said many Republicans are not even deeply offended by gays or secularism, but those who are social conservatives have controlled the Republican message since the 80s. So there was this recent history of 40 years that this has been happening. Liberals argue that the culture war is really a campaign strategy, producing a set of wedge issues designed to anger middle and working class voters so that they'll vote for pro-business Republicans. And so we talked a little beforehand that, and Cody said, yeah, I work on campaign stuff sometimes. It's like you think of people in blocks, and in order to get all those Christians, we're going to have to be pro-life. Basically, a bunch of big businessmen could have said that. And then somehow it turned into this whole like the Christian party from a lot of people, promoting that. And we'll get on to, I don't know if we'll get on to the racial divide of that, because black Christians have not been voting Republican for a while. So,
yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I think that, you know, we disservice the faith, we disservice the church if we don't understand the way political games work and in how coalition building works. You know, if people can develop a message that can get a certain like known population to vote almost consistently for a certain way, then that's a successful political campaign. And I think it happens on both sides. You have to see it there, but there's no doubt that the Republican Party, not historically, you know, starting in the 80s, I think with Reagan, which it's funny, you talk about how the only good government is, you know, there is no such thing as good government type thing. You know, that's not from our founding fathers, that's from Reagan. Reagan said that. You know, that's a fairly new idea actually within American politics. But you have this kind of idea going back there where they're saying, okay, we need to have some level of consistency here. So yeah, you know, they put forth this idea that, you know, whether they actually have the political will to accomplish it is a different question. But, you know, we have to be, I think, we can't be naive to the fact of how it works. And, you know, one of the things that I would, you know, I've been thinking about for a long time is that, you know, we need to be, I think, aware of the fact that neither party is comfortable with Jesus being king, that neither party is comfortable with Jesus being Lord. And so the idea of one party being pro-Christian and the other party being anti-Christian, both parties are anti-Christian. You know, all systems of power are contradictory to the power of Christ. And that doesn't mean we don't engage, that doesn't mean we don't interact, but we can't be naive to that. And the moment we forget that, I think the moment we get, I think, suckered into what is really a big lie that we all buy that has got us to do things that, you know, 20 years ago, we wouldn't even think about. You know, Republican Christians were leading the charge in immigration reform, you know, 10, 15 years ago. You have, you know, Republican Christians who care deeply about refugees, and you have all of these things that
I was actually reviewing that in this book. She was reviewing that President George W. Bush, while we can criticize his stance on war and initiating wars, his stance on immigration was way better. Mm-hmm. And he was very friendly with Mexico and wanted to create pathways, and he wanted to create a lot of good things. And it's like, wow. Yeah. And he got lambasted for the war stuff, and then he missed the good part that he did. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, you think of McCain here in Arizona, you know. Like,
yeah. It was him and McCain and Ted Kennedy were all kind of putting together a very gracious immigration reform. And it's like,
sorry, other people should talk.
Yeah. No, but what's interesting is, I think the advent of social media and its algorithms to some degree have exacerbated this. And what you've seen is it's created the echo chambers that then have pushed things off to the sides. And so people are moving towards the poles of the political parties with these ideas, and not having those kind of cross pollinating ideas, those kind of middle road ideas that we could find common ground on, because we're really succumbing to the echo chambers of our feeds and the people that we're surrounding ourselves with and the voices that we're listening to.
It's degraded into only a battle for power now, and no discussion of getting anyone along any line of spectrum.
Well, the reality is, like, the parties can now, going back to what Cody was talking about and looking at blocks, they can they have the data on what interests you, right? And so now they can send you their individual messages to feed that, you know, mm-hmm. and to incrementally move you. So that's that's just kind of the model, because it's an advertising based model, right? So people will pay to be able to send targeted ads to the people that they want to.
And
And so
15
it ends
years
up
ago,
being that we're only hearing the messages that they've already determined we want to hear, right? And are able to move us. So,
and who would have thought 15 years ago that Facebook was going to be driving our parents' generation deeper into their polarization? Facebook, they would have thought that was just for the kids 15 years ago. Now it's like making people amplify their views already.
They didn't have .edu account emails anyway, so they couldn't have got on Facebook.
Yeah. So I want to shift gears a little. One thing when it comes to the abortion issue with the church, Christianity, and the Catholic Church, besides the Protestant Church, in general, was very, very, very pro-life. This battle to either ban it or ban it. They didn't really have any other solutions. It was just ban it. Not going to talk about contraception. Not going to talk about sex ed. You can only get pregnant like 3 to 5 days of the month, and not the rest of the time. Not going to promote birth control. You know, the church shot itself in the foot. It wanted like to. I basically think it came down to not really trying to minimize abortions, but trying to control the population to be, abstinent. There was like abstinence stuff not even 15 years ago in government. And so, I mean, that might have been George Bush, W. Bush. But anyways, with abortion, I'm going to set you guys up to talk about it. Oh, I do want to hear, how do you navigate that? Make a way for others. How do you navigate that as a Christian if you're going to vote for Biden? And I was recently made aware that Harris was very politically active for Planned Parenthood, and that's like the devil to the Christian right. And so how could they vote for that? Like, if they believe all of these pieces together, how could they then jump the fence and vote for that situation? But one thing that Grant's gonna love that I bring up is like something that hit us like maybe 15 years ago with Shane Claiborne was a consistent ethic of human life. So all the Christians cared about abortion, but nobody was talking about George W. Bush like starting 2 wars. And it was all vengeance in our hands. No problem with that. No problem with that. Go to war. Like, all the Christians around me were like fine with that. And reading him, I was like, yeah, why the heck are we so okay with war? That's not good. That is not good. Like, as a Christian. I mean, for militaries and governments, sure. But for me to be okay with that, no. And that was one part of it. But then it brings up, if you make it if you challenge yourself and your government and your society to have a consistent ethic of human life, it then brings in what you do with not just abortion, but what you do with unwed single mothers who got pregnant, to help them and not just force them into this really crappy situation. It also deals with, war. It also deals with the ethics of life, people that are in a coma or injured to a really bad state, of euthanasia questions and things like that, assisted suicide. It brings into question if we're doing anything about
gun laws.
Capital punishment. If we're doing, what did you say, Dave?
Oh, I said at some point Grant needs to talk about gun laws.
Guns. Yeah, it brings into question guns.
Human life.
Consistent ethic of life would relate to guns, and also veterans committing suicide and teenagers committing suicide. That would all be
mental health, right? Homelessness.
Yeah, mental health.
I mean, there's a whole gamut of things that we're talking about when we're talking about.
So when we make it one issue, we're saying like all these other issues are not that important. This one issue is what matters. And we just named 8 off the top of our heads that are also ethics of human life. Very, very life or death situations. Mm-hmm. So I'll let you guys speak to that. So first, try to answer the question, just how do you navigate that as a Christian? How could you check, Biden with a good conscience, and then on the abortion issue? And then If any of you after that want to speak to the consistent ethic aspect.
One thing I would just throw in first, and I think this is really important, is that there is a very high, like, within the Republican Party, I think in general, but then also I think within the Christians within the Republican Party, is there's a high standard or expectation of individual responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as we're talking about big and large, or large and small governments, that's another piece that like plays a big role. And that breaks it down. And so the reason I'm bringing that up is because I think that does, for a lot of people, make the pro-life thing, minimizing it to this baby who has no choice, right? So when you have a really high sense of individual responsibility, I think you can more easily narrow it down to just pro-life because the baby has no choice, right? So I just want to say that as kind of a caveat for how people see this. I think for me, it's painful, like, to know that that's a concession that I'm making. It's far less painful this year, and it was far less painful in 2016, because the person I'm voting against is, to me, like the least pro-life person, like a public persona I've ever seen. And so when I look at his character, his attributes, the way he talks, and the way what he cares about seems to be very anti-life, in a really holistic sense. And so it makes it pretty, like, easy for me. It was easy in 2016. And it'll be even easier this year, to not vote for him. I still, like, kind of have to recognize that I'm making a concession when I click the Biden-Harris ticket. I recognize I'm doing that. The other point I'll make really quickly, and maybe someone else, if they want to elaborate on it, is I actually don't think Republicans really care about reducing abortions. And so it's been proven I think there's been 3 times in the last 40 years where Republicans have controlled the presidency, the House of Representatives, and the Senate, and they've never done anything to overturn Roe v. Wade or anything at the national level. I think, getting back to Brett's point, I think some arguments could be made at the local level that there have been things that have been done. And this is probably a whole nother, like, video that we could make, just kind of unpacking some of that. Yeah, actually, I'm not even going to open that can right now, but those are some of the things that I've done personally.
I want to hear each of you on this, like how you would navigate that issue. Like, that's the number one question for the audience. We're kind of analyzing, like, how they think this is the number one issue for them. So how do you navigate that? Who's next?
G.
Yo, G. Oh, Dave, you're muted.
The way that, sorry,
that has to happen at least one time on a Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
I have not been on a single Zoom meeting where that has not happened once.
So kind of the way that I look at it is that, so from a starting point, okay, I am for life in all its ways, but I would not consider myself pro-life in the way that it's usually referenced. So one thing is that I do feel that it is speculative whether life, or like the soul, is conceived at that moment of conception, of whether those first cells, I mean, it's just something where it's like, it's hard to make public policy based on something where we're being very speculative about what where a human life has actually like become a unique individual soul. That's kind of a tricky point to navigate. There are other faiths that have been along before Christianity that have different opinions than Christianity does. And so we're basing that on one interpretation of when a soul is created. So that's one thing. Another thing is that I personally just have, I think that abortion should be rare. It's sad when it happens, but that women should be able to, basically the priority of life goes with the currently alive human rather than the speculative thing, speculative person. So that's kind of the way that I see it, and that laws that actually make abortion safer and legal, they overall in society reduce abortion. So by actually keeping it as an option that is hopefully only used in worst case scenario type situations where somebody feels like they have no other choice, that they have a way to do it safely, and where you don't have a person who dies, or like an adult human that dies because of this situation.
So if the World Health Organization is right and 25% of all pregnancies end in an active termination, which is 40 million a year, is that rare? And is that,
Well, but part of that though is that in countries where abortion is illegal, the abortion rates are typically higher. So, by making it as, this is me, I mean, I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but by making it a legal option, you're reducing the actual act of it happening, and it's also safer. So that's why I don't think it should be, one reason why I don't think it should be made illegal.
How about you, G?
Yeah, thanks. I think this is a really, really tough one. Some of you guys may know this about me, some of you guys may not, but I'm actually the product of a teenage pregnancy, and I was adopted. And so this issue is very real to me. I probably could have been very easily aborted, and I feel like I had a chance at life, and God blessed me with the ability to live my life, and I'm grateful and thankful for that. To answer your question first off, Travis, I don't think I can, with a very clear conscience, check the Biden ticket, knowing this issue. But like many of other issues besides abortion, where I have moved is from a very hyper black and white thinking about issues, very right or very wrong, to a much more nuanced and gray position on things. And certainly dovetailing on what Nate said, one of the things that really hit me like a cold water in the face was, man, there's been so many times where the Republicans have had the ability to do something and they haven't. And now with the appointment of Barrett upcoming, we're going to see a very, very conservative Supreme Court. And let's see if something's actually done with Roe. Let's see. I don't think it's going to happen. I personally don't think it's going to happen. I've even heard Trump say, I've heard other people say, that best case scenario is if Roe gets overturned, they'll kick it to a state issue, right? So if you kick it to a state issue and California keeps it legal and Arizona is illegal, let's say, it's $100 flight to go over there and, have an abortion. That's not going to stop people from having abortions by kicking it to a state issue. And then the other thing that was very impactful for me is, I didn't want to show a visual because it would be hard to do on a Zoom call. So I'm gonna do this, and this is a graph, and this is 1973, and this is today. The abortion rate has gone down steadily every year since Roe versus Wade, no matter whether there was a Democratic president or a Republican president. It was lower under Obama than it was under Bush. And it's even getting lower still. I think there's a slight uptick right now under Trump, but it's very slight. And what I realized is in that the idea that some of these issues are gray and nuanced is that there are policies on the left that actually do reduce abortions, access to healthcare, access to birth control, contraceptives. All these things are actually reducing the abortion rate. But it seems like folks on the right don't want to acknowledge that and don't want to think that that's an okay part of it. And so I struggle with that part. But I think for me, it's muddy and it's gray. And this is the one issue and will continue to be the one issue that I struggle with and I grapple through.
Before you go, Cody or Brett, one thing I want to interject there is that I was reading an article that said that the studies basically show that in any country that it's legal or illegal, there's really no difference in numbers of abortions per capita. And that's interesting. And then you hear that it really doesn't change with Republican-controlled government or Democrat-controlled governments. And that's interesting. And then you find out it's been going steadily down since Roe v. Wade. That's interesting. It's like we've been fed this big, highly charged freaking nuclear bomb for the right has been fed that for 30 years, 40 years to be like, that was like, I wrote this down. I feel like that was Trump's silver bullet to get the Christians. He swore to it and he kept his word and he has them. Like he still has the Christians who think that way under his thumb. And it's like, it really is truly a one issue vote for a lot of these people. And many of them are close to me. How about you, Cody?
Yeah, I was hoping you were going to ask Brett first so that I could just say what he said. But no, I mean, look, it's a really hard issue. And I think that there's some ways where you can say, yes, we can have the moral conversations about it. And then we also have to understand the nature of how politics work and how human nature works and how the government interacts with those moral dilemmas. And I think on the one hand, if abortion is the issue that it is for Christians, then the worst thing they could have done with it is make it a partisan issue, because that basically ends the ability to make progress on it. You know, I think if we want less abortions, we need to have less unwanted pregnancies. And there's not really much of a drive to do that. If we want women to have the choice, and not just to have the choice, but to have it be so that there is the better choice of having the baby, then we not only need to provide care for the babies, but we need to provide care for the moms. You know, I think that the sad reality is that a lot of women who do have abortions don't have it because they have the choice. It's because they feel like they don't have the choice. That the choice for them is, it's either that or they lose their job, or they, can't, like there are so many different things that if we, I think, genuinely cared about this, I think there would be a way for Christians to interact with politics to decrease the desire and need and demand for abortions to a point where you actually could possibly make it illegal or something like that. But going about it the way we have, I think, to me, shows that there's not really an interest in solving the problem. There's an interest in
political battle,
making the noise, and I mean, if you want to talk about virtue signaling, I think that that's really more what it is. It's this virtue signaling that you get within that side that, and I'm not saying that, I think there are plenty of people who are very genuinely want to do good and make a change there. But I think that it's an example of how Christians have been duped into being comfortable with a lot of things that they shouldn't be comfortable with, because people keep dangling the carrot out in front of them and saying, no, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And, I think that if we really cared, we would do more to first reduce it and then have the conversation and understand what motivates the other side. There's zero compassion or empathy, I think, on either side, on either side of it. And yes, we need, there's vulnerable people on both sides, and God wants us to care for all vulnerable people. And if we want to be able to even have a helpful conversation, I think we need to be able to have some level of empathy towards the woman who feels like she has no choice, or the historical reality of women feeling like they have no choice over the choices that men make about who they are and what they do. And if we can't at least acknowledge the reality that it's complicated, then it doesn't matter what we legislate. It's not going to change, I think, the reality of what we deal with. So,
Brett?
Yeah.
You have anything unique to say about it?
Maybe just this, that and maybe it was represented in what's been said, but we tend to think about this just in terms of the law, right? And the law is not unimportant, because the law does give us some kind of instruction. It does guide us. It does shape us in some kind of way. It does represent a value, I guess. It's, but the issue in reducing, ultimately we want to be a people who will welcome life. We want to be a people who, that this is not an option that we take. And that doesn't require the law, right? There's work that can be done in the hearts and the minds of people that ultimately will then help shape and transform the law, right? So people had to be awakened to racial injustices before they were motivated to change the laws, right? And in a lot of other cases, if you can move the hearts of the people and the minds of the people, then one, behavior changes, thus reduction of abortions, but the laws will ultimately change as the values of the people change. So that being said, I think we ought to consider these laws, and it is not an easy, I started to think all right, if you were an abolitionist, what would it take for you? How much agreement on other issues would it take for you to vote in a pro-slavery president? It would be. I can understand why it would be very difficult for somebody to really make that leap and vote for a pro-choice person if you view abortion as the primary moral issue of our time, right? So I understand that mindset, but I also recognize that there's work to be done beyond just the law. And you all have talked about it. There are other things that we can be doing as a people to make this an option that isn't taken, and that's a much broader thing. And there are pieces on the other side that are keys to it, the common ground issues, whether they're healthcare issues or, whatever. So I don't know if that helps, but.
Yeah, to wrap it up, my 2 cents on that issue is, first of all, it's obviously, we have to be sensitive to, here's 6 guys talking about what is primarily framed as a woman's issue.
Right.
And I know people that have had abortions, and no one's excited about it. No one's yeah, it's great. We love having abortions. It's absolutely gut-wrenchingly awful for anyone to have to go through all that. And it's so politicized that people don't even have that empathy or that feeling to know that this is not something people are out for. It's not like they want this to be their hobby or something as stupid as that. But I also think men are half of the problem, because it takes a man to make an unwanted pregnancy.
Mhm.
So it's not just a woman's issue. There is a breakdown in our society, but many of the right wants to then legislate that back, like legislate some sort of morality back to where you wouldn't impregnate somebody who's not your wife and not take care of the baby and all of that. And there's so many ways people are getting unwanted pregnancies, just partying and stuff like that. And some older people getting pregnant when they feel too old. And there's a lot of factors. There's a lot, and people need to be way more listening about it. But one thing I think is the church and the Christian right, the church and the Catholic Church, the Christian right, the Christian Coalition has been absolutely hypocritical about, but it's like they couldn't see beyond their own nose about this, is like, you want to prevent abortion by making it illegal, but you're unwilling to lift a finger when it comes to contraception, birth control, and all of those means to prevent it, because you think that's immoral. You can't do that. Like, you need to help people. You can't legislate them to not have sex. Is that what they thought they were going to accomplish? I think in the 80s they really did. They thought they were going to turn the Christian back to God, turn the country back to being Christian in their perception, and
The country was never Christian. Just
legislate morality.
yeah, I don't know. So yeah, I don't know.
I'm agreeing with a more left view on this. I don't think it's the way to. All they've been doing is fighting for power. That's all it is. There's no persuasion, no solutions.
Part of the statistics, like around like Planned Parenthood specifically, which I know is like a bad word for probably many of the people watching this, but the statistics are that in areas with like a Planned Parenthood within like a certain vicinity, the abortion rates are lower than places that don't have access to Planned Parenthood. And it makes sense if it's just simply about access to contraceptives, right? Like, people aren't getting pregnant because they have free and good resources available to them to avoid pregnancy to begin with. So I'm not making an argument necessarily for Planned Parenthood here, but I do think there is, kind of to your point, Travis, like there's work to be done all along, whether it's like pre-pregnancy, post-pregnancy, whatever, whether adoption, walking through life with a woman who's got an unwanted pregnancy perhaps and is trying to figure out what to do and how to survive. And I think a theology of compassion or a theology of empathy where we can begin to try and imagine like what it's like. And I think that maybe kind of like bringing us back to some of what we talked about to begin with, a lot of what shaped the way we view politics, the way we view America, is based on like being around people who are different than us, caused us to shift the way we view the world, mostly because I think we're able to start seeing things from a different perspective. And by listening to different voices, it began to allow us to think differently.
I wanted to add one little thing here. I had a friend who worked as a nurse, and she was a part of a really cool program that basically partnered the nurse with like essentially unwanted or situations where like a really, really young person gets pregnant, like 11, 12, 13, young teenage pregnancies, and basically is involved. It's part education, like helping this person understand while they're pregnant, like, this is what's happening to you. This is what the baby's like. This is like the stages of development, teaching the young mother, like, this is what is happening, and preparing her to become a mother. And then they actually follow up with them and stay with them, working with them for the first 2 years of them being a mom, to teach them how to change a diaper, how to feed the baby, how to do all these things, how to take them to the doctor, go with them to the doctor's appointments, to make it to where it's like a very welcoming environment for somebody who's just scared out of their mind. And so I think things like that, need to be part of the solution, where you're like, okay, this is something we can do to make it much better in every aspect and reduce abortions. So,
and this is the perfect example. You just said mixed with the rub with the whole right wing versus
that
left.
costs money. That's a nurse for 2 years. Well,
Now,
almost 3 years. So
you
those
don't
things
want abortions, but are you willing to put some money towards this to minimize abortions and create a welcoming environment for people to bring in kids if they aren't in a perfectly organized marriage before the baby comes? And this may mean, I mean, you know, they would be definitely afraid of like a social program, welfare program where they just get money. But what any woman would need if she doesn't have a husband is childcare. So if free childcare was available to anyone that needed it, it's obviously not free. That's a program I'd be willing to be more socialistic about, because I really do want to minimize abortions. So if it takes you a little left to get farther right, I'm okay with that.
Right.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
I think that the one of the issues is we take these parties as a whole thing.
Package.
It's like an all or nothing thing.
Yeah.
Rather than being able to see line item by line item the things where there might be common ground on either side, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's where it's kind of like I can't find a home in either party.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've got line items over here that I just cannot align with, and I got line items over here that I just can't align with. But there are also line items over here that I can, and line items over here that I can. So it becomes a bit more complicated. I guess that's where I sort of feel like I don't have a home, but it also means I don't have any like loyalties to that this is the way that I've got to vote. This is the way that I have to align.
So we didn't get to racial and criminal justice, gun control, economy, climate change, immigration, or healthcare.
Hey, I have
Yes,
one
there's
way
another
to
Zoom coming. There's another Zoom coming as well.
I have one way to tie some of that together. You know, we've talked about Kamala Harris speaking at Planned Parenthood, and they're all freaking out about that. But nobody's freaking out about the fact that Mike Pence spoke at the NRA convention last year. You know, I think that there's stuff that you can see on both sides, and it's easy to turn a blind eye on one side. And
Well, no, they don't see that.
another.
They don't see that as bad, you know.
I know,
yeah. But as a Christian,
that's a different conversation. But I'm more just wanting to throw that in for Grant. That there's a level of duplicity, and there's a lot of level of political gaming, and for politicians to get as far as either of them have made it, you're going to have to sidle up with bad stuff, you know.
Before we go off, you guys okay with one more topic? And
Depends on which one it is.
It'll flow easily because it's pretty much the same concepts as when it comes to healthcare. It's like,
I'm gonna call it a night just because it's like after midnight over here. But I'll get the recap. So
cool.
Right.
Thanks, Dave.
All right, see you guys.
Adios, Dave.
And then we'll shut it down after this one. Thanks, Dave. So with healthcare, you got the right accusing the left of heading towards Bernie Sanders and Medicare for all. There was actually a conflict within the Democratic Party during the campaign or during the debates about who was going to get rid of private insurance, who was Medicare for all, I think, and then who was like open to keeping a public option but then having private insurance. And then on the right, you know, there's a little variation, but they're very afraid to go anywhere that they can get labeled socialism. But my thing is on this is like what I've experienced over my adult life is not good, and it's not working for me and my family at all. I mean, I paid a lot of money last year. I made a little too much and had to pay back Obamacare tax credit. So it ended up being about $1,500 a month for the whole year. I mean, every month the whole year. And I thought I was only paying like $450. So that was rough. I did make too much money, so that was part of that. There was a threshold there. But in previous years where I didn't make that much money, there was times where I was still having to pay like $700 or $800 for mediocre, and this was bronze what I had. So I mean, even all these years later, it's still not working for me, like whatever we have. And we know there's huge lobbies like on insurance and on drugs, and we know the doctors are getting screwed by all the legality and insurance malpractice insurance that they have to deal with. It's like the whole system is, this is one of the most jacked systems in America, I think, health. It is jacked up. And no one, I don't know, the solutions seem way too complicated. They need to do something to really make them accountable and transparent on pricing, and which I guess you call that government regulation, which Republicans don't like. But I don't like this whole, like, they can all charge whatever the heck they want on everybody, and they can totally gouge the insurance companies, which screws all of us with more insurance costs. It's just a messed up situation, and no one understands it. So that was a rant, I guess.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing your thoughts, Travis. You know, I think with the healthcare, like, I think with all of this stuff, and Nate, I think you said it earlier, you know, a democratic republic, which is what we are, we basically, citizens interact with their government in the sense of a social contract. Like that's at the core of what we do. And I think that can make a lot of this stuff a little simpler of, you know, what is an inalienable right versus what is social, you know, like all of this. It's almost like buying into, this is a terrible example, but buying into like different tiers of some like membership package. Like we can want to pay a little bit and get a really small benefit from our membership package, or we can pay a lot and get a lot more membership, you know, benefit from our membership package, or we can decide as a country, like historically, sorry, that was maybe not the best example, but historically, like at one point in time, we decided universal education is something that from a social contract, we believe is worth funding, that public education is something worth funding. At one point in time, we decided that Social Security and making sure that you know, senior citizens and those above 65 are taken care of is part of our social contract. You know, this is not like we don't have to make this deeper moral or biblical issue. This is just us asking the question, what is it that we feel like as American citizens we should get being American citizens, and figure out what does it take to pay for it, and how do we go about that. So in some ways, like I think that in all of these things, we can come back to that. We can take almost the emotions out of it and saying, just ask, like, from my perspective, I believe that part of the social contract of being a citizen of the United States is that everybody has access to free or affordable health care. Like, I don't see why that's that outrageous if we can have access to public education, if we can have access to, you know, national parks and road systems and other things like that. It's a matter of funding. It's a matter of budget.
Doesn't it seem more like a Christian issue than a lot of things?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it is a Christian issue because I'm not the one getting hurt by this stuff. And yeah, sure, like, yeah, it screws up my insurance some too, but like the worst that it happens is it sucks for us a little bit, but there's people who literally up until, you know, the Affordable Care Act could not get insurance and had no way of getting insurance. And
it's
I think
number one cause of bankruptcy too, is
medical debt. And also it's to blame affordable health, to blame the Affordable Care Act for all of the heightened prices of insurance is misunderstanding the nature of how those pricings work, but that's a different thing. But anyways, I guess that's how I process that as a Christian, of saying, like, this is a social contract. And if I'm really seeing my vote and my advocacy in, like, the political system is set up to benefit me regardless of who I vote for. Like, I'm not voting for the benefit of myself. The government is set up to benefit me because of who I am, how I was born, and the nature of just the political world that we live in. Like my vote, what matters to me is how.
Do you mean because you're white? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because I'm a white boy born in Scottsdale to an upper middle class family. Like the system's going to work for me regardless. It's about trying to figure out how we can make this system work for the people that it doesn't work for, and really thinking through that from a policy to policy issue, not being loyal to a party, but really thinking through that stuff. So I guess that's maybe my rant. So next rant, please.
Good thoughts. Come on, boys. Healthcare is on the line here. You're going to save it. You're going to fix it. Not really. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I don't know how to fix it. So I know that there's a complicated issue. I think probably.
I'll ask a more direct question. Are you afraid of there being a government solution that at least covers a minimum of all people? Or do you see?
No, I think this is one thing that's interesting when you talk to Christians from other countries versus Christians here. Like all of a sudden, they're like proud of their public option. They're proud of their. They feel like that's the most Christian thing that they've got going on, or whatever. And here somehow, I think because of the hyper individualism and the emphasis on our kind of own personal responsibility.
And free market capitalism.
Yeah, and capitalism.
Somehow health.
The market will provide the best solution, basically.
Yeah.
And also I would say campaign architecture, like how they're going to speak about these things.
Sure. Yeah. So I do think this is part of loving our neighbor. I think it's part of how we think about a more just society. Where people are cared for. So it doesn't scare me. Now, the question is the option that they're presenting the most effective way, or is it going to be a bureaucratic mess that, I don't have the skills to analyze
right.
that, So I'm dependent on others who might know that world better than I do. But from a moral perspective, I don't have problems. So
I actually know someone from Canada who she got pregnant out of marriage, and she ended up keeping the baby in Canada, and she ended up getting social program to stay at home with the baby for I think years, which I don't know if that's the best thing, but I think having healthcare for sure is a start. That also plays into financial costs of giving birth. So it plays into abortion too.
Yeah.
Jeez, I didn't even think of that until just now.
Well, I think like when we lived in the Czech Republic where we lived, the women get a portion of their pay. I forget what portion it is for 3 years after having a baby.
It's like that in Canada.
Yeah. So, and the paternal leave for most countries with a socialized healthcare is like 3 months, right? Like minimum. So when we talk about like nuclear family values, like, geez Louise, like what is more like beautiful than a family being able to spend time with their newborn in those early phases, for the mom to not have to worry about work, her job's protected. She can go back to work after she has the baby if she wants. Like there's something so beautiful about that. And yes, there's a cost, like of course there's a cost, but in a lot of those countries, they don't have the military size that we do, or this feeling that they need to have as much military, So I think there's of course always a cost to those things, but it's again kind of getting back to one of those original points I made, that we're making decisions on what we view as the people of a republic as important, that we should be providing for as Cody said, in our inalienable rights as citizens of our country. And up until this point, or up until most recently, we've put a massive military above public health.
Everything else.
Yeah. And maybe above everything else if you just go by dollars, right?
Mm-hmm. Which that's what budgets are made out of.
It is.
They're made out of dollars. Yeah, I'm absolutely.
American budgets are made out of dollars.
Nate, you get 5 points on this show. You did absolutely convince me that the budget has moral implications, and now I totally can see it and understand why.
Well, it took only 5 years, because if that conversation was really 5 years ago.
We didn't finish our conversation, basically.
True. We're finishing it now.
But I see how it relates to pregnancy, and I see how it relates to family. You talking about Christian values, man. You got to be like, you're gonna have to bend a little more socially on these things, socialist-ish. Like there's some programs that would be really good for families, really good for unwed mothers, really good.
Say socialized. It's like the idea of like socialist or even like communist or Marxist. It starts like they're such trigger words for the people listening, if there's anyone still listening an hour and a half into this. But
yeah, if they are, God bless them.
God bless you.
Yeah, democratic socialism is not the same as socialism. That drives me crazy. But
I know. Look at the Scandinavian countries, England.
Nordic model.
Yeah, I mean, there's.
Anyway. That's a different conversation.
It totally.
We can talk about the semantics of. And the straw man arguments that are made.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you guys doing this, and I hope it's helpful to some people. So we'll get it on YouTube and then just share it and see if people want to hear us dudes talk about this stuff.
Probably not.
Yeah.
We didn't get to climate change. Climate change, immigration. Dang. Immigration.
I feel like if there's anything, it's people are wanting to hear 6 white guys talk about politics and social issues. So that's perfect.
Middle-aged white guys from Scottsdale.
six middle-aged white guys from Scottsdale.
It's in high demand.
So.
No, but there really is a place for this kind of conversation in the people we were trying to speak to, like that are telling me I'm not a Christian if I vote for Biden.
Yeah,
they definitely need to hear this conversation.
Yeah.
Hey Trav, can I share just one last final word about that I saw Tim Keller, and I appreciate a lot of what Tim Keller says in these spaces, and I think it's pretty helpful just to. It kind of wraps up a little bit about what we're talking about, and it was a series of tweets that he sent out. I thought you guys would appreciate this too. He says, Christians in the freedom of conscience in politics. The Bible binds my conscience to care for the poor, but it does not tell me the best practical way to do it. Any particular strategy, high taxes in government services versus low taxes in private charity, may be good and wise, and may be even somewhat inferred from other things the Bible teaches. But they are not directly commanded, and therefore we cannot insist that all Christians, as a matter of conscience, follow one or the other. The Bible binds my conscience to love the immigrant, but it does not tell me how many legal immigrants to admit into the U.S. every year. It does not exactly prescribe immigration policy. The Bible tells me that abortion is a problem, but it doesn't give me the best way to decrease or end abortion in this country, nor which policies are most effective. The current political parties offer a potpourri of different positions on these and many other topics, most of which, as just noted, the Bible does not speak to directly. This means when it comes to taking political positions, voting, determining alliances, and political involvement, the Christian has liberty of conscience. Christians cannot say to other Christians, no Christian can vote for ... or every Christian must vote for ... unless you can find a biblical command to that effect. I thought that was just a pretty powerful way to kind of sum up what I hope the posture that I believe that we all have is that, to extend grace and to listen, to be empathetic towards one another as people disagree on the best ways to help our country and help us live as a society.
Thank you, Grant.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yep.
All right, guys. Thanks so much. Have a good night.
Bye.
Yeah.
Adios.